campaign finance reform. Unaware that across from him, Jasmine Crockett was sitting on a minefield disguised as a manila folder. She didn't interrupt. She didn't flinch. But piece by piece, she unveiled damning donations, exposed insider emails, and played a voicemail that turned the air electric. Within minutes, his reputation buckled. His name flooded the internet. And the country watched a senator fall, not to shouting, but to precision. How did one woman dismantle a political giant, using nothing but evidence and silence? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. At exactly 8:58 a.m., the countdown clock above the studio cameras struck 2 minutes. In the heart of Austin, Texas, the set of Face the People buzzed beneath 1,000 watts of light, but the tension was invisible, hidden behind crisp lapels and forced smiles. J.D. Vance reclined in his seat like a man who'd already won. His navy suit caught the overhead gleam, and a sapphire tie sat slightly askew, an imperfection he wore like a badge of authenticity. As he launched into his opening remarks, his voice carried that practiced Midwestern charm. Campaign finance reform is just a buzzword, another ghost story from the left to keep voters afraid of their own shadows. He chuckled to himself. The host smiled politely, more out of habit than conviction. What the viewers didn't see, what even the floor director missed, was that Jasmine Crockett hadn't blinked in nearly 30 seconds. She sat across from him in a rust-toned blazer, her elbows on the armrests, spine straight, expression unreadable. Not cold, not warm, just waiting. And in that silence, the air thickened. What looked like calm was pressure barely held together. Jasmine Crockett hadn't come to debate. She came to detonate. Her hands resting lightly in her lap hid the storm she'd carried for weeks. This wasn't a panel. It was a trap. And J.D. Vance had already walked into it, grinning. Across America, viewers were still sipping coffee, unaware that within minutes, a senator would be dismantled. Not by outrage, but by cold, verified proof. Vance, the working-class poster boy turned political insider, had no idea this morning would mark the unraveling. Jasmine had waited, through his lies, through his smirks, through every shady deal passed off as politics. And now, she wasn't waiting anymore. And just like that, the silence cracked. Not with outrage or theatrics, but with the quiet, methodical sound of Jasmine Crockett unfastening the truth. She moved without haste. Her hand slid beneath the table and emerged with a slim folder. Plain, unmarked, the color of parchment left too long in the sun. The host looked up, slightly confused. J.D. Vance barely glanced at it, assuming it was nothing. But Jasmine knew the weight of what she held. It wasn't just paper. It was prelude. She laid the folder down flat, opened it carefully, and turned to the first page with the slow precision of someone who had rehearsed this motion in her mind 1,000 times. The page trembled only slightly as she held it up, not from nerves, but from the electricity in the room. "Before we go any further," she said, her voice even and unhurried, "I think viewers deserve to know what we're really talking about." The camera cut to her hand, now holding a standard issue FEC filing, blown up for clarity. The yellow highlighter streaked across the middle like a warning flare. Jasmine didn't dramatize it. She didn't need to. "This document," she continued, "is a financial disclosure form submitted on February 3rd. It records a $50,000 donation made to the Central Families for American Strength PAC." Her tone didn't shift. That PAC, as we know, is heavily aligned with the senator's policy apparatus. She paused, then placed the next sentence like a mine in the middle of the stage. "The donor, Dartland Strategic Holdings, a wholly owned subsidiary of Halvern Systems, a defense contractor under active federal investigation for falsifying project deliverables on government drone contracts." The temperature dropped. The host stiffened. A camera operator shifted slightly, almost imperceptibly. J.D. Vance blinked. Once. Twice. Then leaned back, throwing on the same old casual arrogance he always wore when cornered. He gave a clipped, dismissive laugh, like a man who's heard this tune before. "Public record," he said, waving a hand. "What people donate is their business. I don't control them." His voice was light, but something behind his eyes wasn't. That kind of defense might have worked in a closed Senate chamber. It might have worked behind the veil of party loyalty. But here, on live TV with millions watching, it sounded like insulation tearing off in the wind. Jasmine didn't break eye contact, didn't flinch. There was no venom in her gaze, only the weight of restraint. She leaned forward slightly, elbows still planted, her voice steady and low. "That's not an answer, Senator. That's an excuse." Then she placed the paper face down on the desk, like a card in a game she wasn't losing. "And I haven't even turned the page yet." No one spoke. For a full beat, the studio fell into a silence so sharp it might have cut glass. The unfairness of it all, how often men like Vance deflect, smile, and move on, hung in the air like smoke. But Jasmine didn't need volume. She didn't need anger. She had documentation. And J.D. Vance, for the first time in a very long time, looked like he didn't know what might come next. And as the audience was still absorbing the shock of the FEC filing, Jasmine flipped the next page, this time with more force. The paper made a crisp sound as it turned, sharp enough to slice through the atmosphere in the studio. She didn't speak immediately. She let the silence return, but now it pulsed with weight, like something unseen was coiling tighter with every second. Then, almost too calmly, she held up a new document, this one shorter but far more dangerous. "What comes after a donation," she said, "is often more telling than the donation itself." Her eyes flicked once toward the camera, as if inviting the country to lean in. "This," she continued, holding the page between two fingers, "is an internal email dated March 7th, addressed directly to your office from a senior lobbyist at Cormac Strategy Group." She paused, then read the body aloud. "Thank you again for your swift action following the bill's introduction. We appreciate your office's responsiveness and clarity." She lowered the page like a blade being sheathed. "That's not congratulations for leadership. That's confirmation of coordination." J.D. Vance let out a dry scoff, louder than it needed to be, the kind that fills a room when someone realizes silence no longer protects them. "That's hearsay," he said, waving his hand like a man swatting away a fly. "Anyone can write an email. It's not proof. It's opinion." He leaned back, recrossing his legs with forced ease. "And besides, I get thanked for things all the time. It's how politics works." But Jasmine didn't move, didn't blink. Her voice stayed as measured as a courtroom transcript. "Except this isn't just any email. It didn't come from a PAC volunteer or a campaign donor. It came from a federally registered lobbyist routed directly through your legislative office's official email server." She turned the document, revealing a high-resolution print of the metadata trail, and it was received by your senior policy advisor at 8:43 a.m., just hours after the bill's draft went public. Her tone never rose, but her precision made it impossible to look away. "I didn't say it. I didn't assume it. Your office confirmed it, in writing." The host blinked, unsure whether to intervene or stay silent. The producers behind the cameras froze, eyes locked on the real-time transcript feed, watching a congressional career thread itself into unraveling. And still, Jasmine sat perfectly still. No smugness, no adrenaline. Just the quiet, immovable posture of someone who had been forced to wait for justice longer than anyone else at that table could possibly understand. She had played by the rules. She had followed every channel. And yet, time after time, men like J.D. Vance got to dismiss facts as noise, call accountability, overreach, and shrug off consequence like it was optional. But now the words weren't allegations. They were receipts, and he couldn't laugh them away. And just as Jasmine finished her last sentence, calm, precise, and devastating, a ripple moved through the studio like the first shock of an earthquake no one saw coming. Up in the control room, behind soundproof glass, red indicator lights blinked to life in rapid succession. Heads turned. Keyboards clicked faster. 3 producers huddled around a central monitor where a live data verification stream was unfolding in real time. Every document Jasmine had submitted was now being cross-referenced. Timestamps, routing paths, domain origins. The studio had a protocol for these moments. A live verification team was built for political curveballs, but no one had expected this. The speed of the matches stunned even the staff. Within 30 seconds, the lead fact-checker pushed a button and relayed the result through the producer's headset, his voice clear, stunned. "Confirmed." It's all clean. It's real. On the studio floor, the anchor's eyes flicked upward, briefly, subtly, toward the silent cue. He adjusted his tie, then turned to the camera and said, his voice dipping an octave, "We are receiving confirmation. Live at this very moment. The documents provided by Congresswoman Crockett have been authenticated. The email in question was sent from an official .gov address. The server data and signature trail match? Legislative archives." He paused, visibly rattled. "They are legitimate." J.D. Vance didn't flinch right away. For a second, he held the same practiced mask, chin lifted, hands folded in front of him. But then the truth began to crack through the polish. His right hand, once relaxed, now twitched near the corner of his notepad. His thumb tapped the table 3 times, then 4, then stopped altogether. The grin he wore earlier had curdled into a clenched line, and a faint sheen of sweat began to form just below his hairline. His foot, once crossed leisurely, now pressed flat against the studio floor, anchored as if he sensed the stage beneath him had started to shift. He opened his mouth slightly, then closed it again. For years, Vance had commanded rooms with that same easy confidence. A boy from Ohio who made good, who could spin policy like poetry, who never got caught sweating. But now, before millions of viewers, the man built on polish and deflection sat in deafening quiet as undeniable facts began to dismantle the armor he had mistaken for truth. And Jasmine, she didn't move, didn't gloat. She just watched, steady and silent. The weight of years of being dismissed now repaid, not with vengeance, but with verification. And just when the tension seemed to peak, Jasmine reached into the folder again, not rushed, not theatrical, but with a kind of dreadful certainty that made every eye in the room fix on her fingertips. She pulled out a single page, cream-colored and dense with corporate formatting. The Treadford Energy letterhead gleamed faintly beneath the studio lights, its seal embossed like something meant never to be questioned. She placed it gently on the table in front of her, facing the host and J.D. Vance, and slid it forward until it lay squarely in the center of the camera's overhead shot. Then, with a calmness that carried more force than any raised voice, she began, "This is an internal memo from Treadford Energy, dated April 7th. It was issued by the company's Senior Vice President of Government Affairs, 2 days before Senator Vance's office filed an amendment to the Industrial Infrastructure Bill." Her voice didn't change, but the words carried a precise, almost surgical weight. "The language here is careful, but not careful enough." She raised the page to eye level and read aloud, slow and razor clean. "We anticipate positive movement on our permit requests following direct communication with Senator Vance's office scheduled this Thursday. Messaging alignment has been confirmed." Then silence. She let it hang. Let the implications swell into the stillness. "This wasn't a coincidence," she said. "It was choreography." J.D. Vance froze. His left hand dropped from the desk to his lap, where his fingers curled into the fabric of his pant leg. A tremor flickered along his thigh. Not enough to catch the average viewer's eye, but clear to anyone trained in body language or betrayal. The confidence in his posture buckled in microscopic fractures. He glanced at the anchor, then at the monitor just out of frame, as if looking for an off-ramp. But there wasn't one. Not here. Not now. His eyes briefly met Jasmine's, and something in them faltered. A twitch, a doubt, a recognition. He knew what she had just done, and Jasmine knew what it meant. For years, she had watched men like him glide through loopholes with a smile and a press release. She had seen documents like this buried in subcommittees, dismissed in closed-door hearings, redacted until meaningless. But here, on air, in front of a nation used to forgetting, she had brought it into the light. No speculation, no spin, just one undeniable truth, a memo with a timestamp that beat his vote by 48 hours. A company that didn't ask for permission, they expected results. And Vance had delivered them. And as the memo from Treadford Energy lay flat on the desk like a sealed indictment, its implications still rippling through the air, Jasmine Crockett exhaled softly, then delivered the turn no one had seen coming. Her eyes stayed locked on J.D. Vance, but her voice grew even calmer, as though peeling back the final layer didn't require force, just truth. "Let me be clear," she said. "I didn't uncover all this by accident. And I didn't dig it up myself. The truth didn't knock on my door. It walked in, carrying guilt it could no longer ignore. There was a pause, but it wasn't empty. It was heavy, stretched taut with anticipation. Even the studio lights seemed to dim, as if the set itself was holding its breath. The documents, she continued, one hand resting lightly atop the folder, came from someone who worked next to you, Senator, not in theory, in proximity, in silence. She let the statement sit just long enough to see Vance's right hand clench slightly, his thumb pressing into the edge of the desk. She saw it. So did the cameras. He wasn't a politician, not a journalist, not a partisan hack. He was a logistics coordinator. You may not remember his name, but he remembers every room you were in. Vance didn't speak, but his composure betrayed him. His eyes narrowed, not with anger, but calculation. Searching. Who? When? How much had he seen? He handled the details, Jasmine said, her tone sharpened but never raised. The seating charts, the ride shares, the calls that couldn't be put on record. He booked the flights no one logged and sat in the corners of rooms where the real decisions were made. Not the ones you announced, the ones you negotiated. She tapped once on the desk, a soft but chilling metronome. He watched as policy turned into currency, as your public promises were silently traded for corporate favors behind closed doors. The silence grew suffocating. Even the anchor, now leaning slightly forward, didn't interrupt. There were no questions to ask that hadn't already been answered by her presence, by the calm fury in her delivery. And for a long time, she continued, he said nothing, not because he didn't care, but because that's how the system trains people like him, and people like me. Keep your head down. Don't speak unless spoken to. Let the powerful handle things, even when you know what they're doing is wrong. She glanced toward the camera, not dramatically, just enough to remind the viewers watching at home that this wasn't about abstract corruption. It was about lives. But then it got personal. Her voice dropped by a degree. Cooler now, almost too steady. It got personal when your office pushed through a subcommittee amendment to reduce federal support for rural hospitals. It was a small clause, tucked into the language like a needle, something no headline ever covered. But it pulled the rug out from beneath places already hanging by a thread. She looked back at Vance. One of those hospitals was in Decatur, Alabama. One of those nurses was his sister. She'd worked there 9 years, never missed a shift. And one morning she called him crying because the hospital was closing, because her job, her security, her future had disappeared overnight. No gasps, just the sound of breathing. One deep inhale across the room. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He just listened to her cry. Then he hung up and stared at his screen and realized that the memo, the one you helped move through committee, was one he'd formatted, edited, and distributed himself. Jasmine's words didn't accuse. They exposed. That was the breaking point, not because it was new, but because he finally understood what it meant to be part of the machine. He wasn't innocent, but he wasn't blind anymore either. And when he realized his silence had helped hurt someone he loved, he made a decision. She opened her palm and gestured to the folder. He gave me this. Not for money, not for revenge, not to go viral or score political points. He didn't want attention. He didn't even ask for protection. He just said, I can't let this stay buried. Not after what it cost her, not after what it might keep costing other people. Jasmine's voice fell to a whisper, and yet somehow felt louder than anything else in the room. And that, she said, is the only reason we're having this conversation right now. The injustice, the imbalance, the way Vance's policies lived in sound bites while their consequences bled into real lives, had been brought to the table not by opposition or outrage, but by a man who had once helped hold the door open, a man who finally chose to close it. Jasmine didn't need applause. She didn't need the cameras to pan in, because for the first time, the truth wasn't just being spoken, it was being witnessed. And just as the gravity of Jasmine's previous revelation settled into the bones of the room, the anonymous insider, the sister's lost job, the undeniable trail of cause and effect, she moved without fanfare, reaching into the inner lining of her blazer with the kind of calm that felt surgical, rehearsed. From a narrow hidden pocket, she drew out a single silver flash drive. It was small, nearly invisible against the desk's black surface. But when she placed it gently near her notes, the gesture commanded more silence than any speech. She didn't raise it dramatically. She didn't smile. Instead, she looked toward the anchor and gave a single nod. "I received this less than 12 hours ago," she said. Her voice remained low, her cadence exact, the energy in the room bending toward her like iron to a magnet. "It's an audio file, a voicemail, left by the executive vice president of Tredford Energy." The anchor stiffened but didn't object. Behind the glass, the control room buzzed into motion, hands moving fast over dials, signals exchanged with tight nods. Jasmine waited for nothing. The message was left on the personal phone of one of Senator Vance's senior staffers. The timing is key. It was recorded just hours after the revised amendment language was submitted to committee. She folded her hands in front of her and leaned forward slightly. Not confrontational, but composed in a way that made even the microphone seem to lean closer. "Play it," she said simply. A soft click. Then the studio speakers came to life. Not with music, not with static, but with a voice. Male, confident, unapologetically casual. "Hey Rob, just wanted to say thanks again for walking us through the revision last Thursday. Really appreciate how tight the Senators team kept it. We're looking good on the permit front now. Phase 2 should be smooth. Let's catch up next month, our treat. Tell the boss we appreciate the discretion." The words rolled across the studio like slow thunder. There was no debate, no ambiguity, just confirmation, in the speaker's own voice, that the coordination between the company and the senator's office wasn't just real, it was routine. The final sentence, soft and flippant, "Tell the boss we appreciate the discretion," landed like a dagger sheathed in velvet. J.D. Vance reacted instantly, but not with logic, only instinct. He jerked forward, one palm slamming lightly against the desk, the other gesturing sharply toward the anchor. "This is a setup," he barked, his voice pitched higher than before, no longer steady. "You're going to let this play on live television without vetting it? You're letting her air anonymous voicemails like this as a courtroom?" There was panic now, not in his words, but in the way he was stringing them together, fast and jagged, like someone searching for a life raft in a rising tide. Jasmine didn't even blink, her eyes locked on him, not with fury, but with finality. "No, Senator," she replied, each syllable cut with quiet force. "This isn't a courtroom, and this isn't a stunt. It's context, and it just arrived." She didn't raise her voice because she didn't have to. The weight was in the truth, and the truth didn't need volume to feel like a hammer. The words hung in the air like smoke over a battlefield, thick, acrid, and impossible to ignore. There was no applause, no dramatic music, no one yelling over her. Only the slow, dawning realization that what had once been a carefully guarded distance between power and payoff had just been compressed into a 26-second voicemail, delivered in the executive's own voice, dripping with entitlement and casual corruption. And in that stillness, where the power used to sit quietly behind smiles and polished rebuttals, Jasmine didn't look triumphant. She looked done. Done waiting. Done warning. Done playing fair with a system that never extended the same to her. And as J.D. Vance reached again for a response, for a way to breathe past the moment, all that echoed back was his silence, made louder now by a voice that wasn't even hers. And as the final echoes of Jasmine's calm but shattering phrase, "It's context, and it just arrived," faded from the air, the outside world did not wait for commercial breaks or closing statements. It exploded. The platform formerly known as Twitter, now simply X, lit up with a ferocity usually reserved for breaking wars or celebrity deaths. But this was different. This was real-time political reckoning, and it came with a face. J.D. Vance's face. A close-up from the live broadcast, eyes wide, jaw caught between defense and collapse, a bead of sweat tracing the edge of his temple, was screenshotted, zoomed, frozen, and reposted thousands of times within minutes. One user added the caption, "When you realize the cameras caught the cover-up." Another stitched the image side by side with Jasmine Crockett's unwavering glare and wrote, "David brought a folder." The meme floodgates had opened, but the humor wasn't just for laughs. It carried an unmistakable undercurrent of catharsis. For every tweet mocking Vance's unraveling, there were threads beneath them, raw, blistering reflections from nurses, teachers, veterans, small business owners, people who had felt invisible in the corridors of power he once strutted through untouched. And now they were watching him fall in pixels and silence. But the numbers told a deeper story. The network had rolled out a live audience poll just as the voicemail segment aired. A simple question: do you find Congresswoman Crockett's evidence credible? The banner crawled beneath the screen, nearly unnoticed at first, but as the seconds passed, viewers began responding in waves. 53%, then 61%. By the 3-minute mark, it locked in at 68%. Not a margin of error, not a toss-up. A decisive, nearly two-thirds verdict from the American public, delivered not in courts or campaigns, but live during the broadcast. And the number didn't budge. It held. In a digital landscape that shifts by the millisecond, it was as unflinching as the woman who had triggered it. Then came the quote. Jasmine had said it with no dramatic pause, no flourish, no shout. Just a line dropped with chilling precision, like the last nail in a coffin. If it's false, sue me. The studio hadn't even processed it when the internet already had. Within minutes, it was everywhere. X, TikTok, Instagram stories, even the subreddits usually reserved for memes and gaming. One post simply showed the quote in white letters on a black screen. No tags, no caption, just the line. Another clip set the moment to a slow orchestral build, timing the crescendo to Jasmine's delivery. By the 10-minute mark, users were changing their bios to the phrase. By the hour, it was trending #1 in 7 states. It wasn't just a catchphrase, it was a declaration, a dare. A woman standing alone under the harsh lights of a live broadcast, holding a man with power accountable, and daring him, in front of the nation, to come for her if she was wrong. But the system wasn't used to that. For decades, men like J.D. Vance had weathered scandal with silence, cloaked their deals in vague language, distanced themselves from the very policies they voted for. But no one had ever said it so plainly. Sue me. It was the legal equivalent of flipping the chessboard and demanding a rematch, with cameras rolling. And the audience, tired, wired, jaded, skeptical, recognized it instantly. It wasn't a performance, it was proof. And Jasmine Crockett had just dared an empire to respond. So far, it hadn't, but America had. And as the weight of Jasmine's last move, the voicemail, the challenge, the calm dismantling, still pulsed through the room like aftershock, the anchor finally found his voice. But it was different now. The neutrality was gone. The polish faded. What emerged was something strained, urgent, and just slightly unsteady, as if he too understood they had crossed into uncharted territory. He cleared his throat, fingers twitching once over his stack of cards before discarding them entirely. Given the serious nature of what's been presented here today, he said slowly, our team has arranged for an immediate legal response. Joining us now live is Melinda Drury, former ethics investigator with the Department of Justice and an expert in congressional oversight. The screen split and a new presence filled the broadcast. A woman framed in the quiet gravity of a book-lined office, her eyes direct, her tone stripped of opinion. She didn't posture, she didn't stall, she simply answered. This doesn't yet rise to a federal crime, she said, not without further documentation and a formal subpoena process. But make no mistake, what you're seeing here is a textbook ethical failure, not in isolation, in pattern, repeated behavior, influence over legislation by private entities that benefit directly, and more than that, coordinated concealment of that influence, which if verified by the Senate Ethics Committee would represent a breach of public trust at the highest level. The studio returned to full frame. The anchor shifted in his seat, lips parting as if to ask Jasmine for a response. But she was already moving, slowly, deliberately, without saying a word. From the inside flap of her folder, she pulled a small, unlabeled USB drive, matte black, no markings, no branding. Just a clean, silent vessel containing everything. Every memo, every email, every calendar log, cross-reference, internal note, and transcript. She didn't hold it up. She didn't announce what it was. She simply leaned forward, extended her hand, and slid the drive across the glossy desk toward the anchor. It moved like a blade sheathed in quiet intent, stopping precisely in front of him, no more than an inch from his untouched coffee cup. Then she spoke. Only once. "It's all there," she said, not with triumph, but with gravity. Unredacted, chronological, verified. Her voice didn't rise. Her shoulders didn't shift. But something in the room did. The temperature dropped. The weight of what she had just turned over was unmistakable. It was the culmination of weeks spent tracing shadows, cross-checking signatures, interviewing quietly in rooms with no windows, assembling not just a case, but a reckoning. And she hadn't come to accuse. She had come to document, to hand over the truth in a form that could no longer be spun, minimized, or buried under procedural delay. There were no dramatics, no camera sweeps, no sound cues. Only the sound of a USB drive clicking gently against glass, and a nation, somewhere beyond the studio walls, beginning to understand what accountability finally looked like when it wore no anger, no ego, and no fear. And as the studio lights dimmed and the screen dissolved into a commercial break, the illusion of control disintegrated. J.D. Vance didn't wait for the segment to end. He stood abruptly, tearing off his mic with shaking fingers, the cord whipping against his blazer. His phone was already in his hand, trembling under the weight of push notifications arriving in bursts like machine gun fire. Every step he took away from the set was faster, sharper, more desperate. The moment he cleared the last LED rig, he barked into the screen, "Get media on the line." All of it. Now. But the algorithm had already outrun him. 7 states, Ohio, Arizona, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Georgia, and North Carolina, were trending with some variation of number Vance exposed or number sue me then. The image of his frozen expression, captured just before Jasmine slid the USB across the desk, had become a meme of national proportion. His comms director tried calling 3 times. He declined everyone. Instead, he opened a staff group thread and typed, "Lock. Everything. Down. Shut the accounts before this spreads any further." But it was too late. Videos were being remixed on TikTok. Tweets had racked up hundreds of thousands of likes. News banners were already looping his quote, taken wildly out of context. "This is playing dirty." He turned a corner, nearly knocking over a lighting assistant, and shoved open the exit to a side hallway not meant for talent. The quiet of the corridor made the chaos in his head sound louder. He was alone now, just him and the flood. He yanked the phone back up, and this time connected to a top advisor. "Delete the entire X account. Every tweet, every reel. I don't care. Pull it down." The voice on the other end hesitated, stammered something about optics. That was the last straw. JD's voice went from strained to volcanic in one breath. "God damn it, do it!" he bellowed, slamming his fist so hard against the cinder block wall that the impact echoed down the corridor. "If we let this sit out there, we're not just getting dragged, we're setting ourselves on fire. Take it down now, or we kill the campaign ourselves." There it was, the moment every staffer feared but never named, when the candidate lost control not just of the message, but of the mirror. No spin, no redirect. Just a man who had built a platform on confidence, now unraveling under fluorescent hallway lights with a cracked voice and blood rising in his cheeks. It wasn't Jasmine Crockett's folder that broke him. It was the echo chamber he had spent years cultivating, now turning in real time to tear him apart. And the worst part? The cameras weren't rolling anymore, but the internet never stopped. Back in the studio, while J.D. Vance spiraled somewhere off camera, Jasmine Crockett remained still, eerily still. She hadn't moved a single inch since the moment he fled. Her posture was almost statuesque, as if carved into the leather of her chair. One hand rested lightly atop the folder that had ignited a political inferno, fingers splayed but steady, as if anchoring herself in the eye of the storm. Her breathing was measured, her gaze fixed. She didn't gloat. She didn't revel. She simply waited as if this moment had already played out in her mind days ago, frame by frame. The storm had always been coming. She had simply chosen to face it without flinching. The network anchor, now visibly rattled but still composed enough to steer the broadcast, turned back to the camera. "Given the gravity of what's unfolded here," he said, pausing to glance off screen for confirmation, "we've brought back legal analyst Melinda Drury for an emergency ethics review." The screen split again, revealing Drury's stern face, her DC background replaced with a stark legal graphic. She didn't waste time. "This is no longer a question of political embarrassment," she stated. "If what's been presented holds up, and initial verification suggests it does, then we are looking at repeated, coordinated influence by private entities on federal legislation. That, under Section 301 of the Congressional Ethics Act, meets the threshold for immediate inquiry by the Office of Congressional Ethics. This isn't just smoke, it's a fire with paperwork." That single phrase, "a fire with paperwork," hit the control room like a seismic wave. The production crew exchanged glances. Engineers whispered into headsets. Editors began clipping the segment for syndication before the show had even ended. Still, Jasmine did not speak. Her silence was not absence, it was presence refined to its sharpest edge. Because she knew what was happening beyond the studio walls. She knew the sound of high-speed keystrokes in PR firms across Washington. She knew that PACs were scrambling to rewrite talking points, that comms directors were fielding panic calls from donors now asking why they hadn't been warned. She knew that websites once proudly plastered with "backed by J.D. Vance" were now quietly being wiped clean. Entire pages were being pulled, search histories redirected, caches cleared. In private donor forums, places where Jasmine would never be invited, panic bloomed like a virus. From New York hedge fund rooms to Houston oil boardrooms. One directive spread: disassociate. Now, they didn't wait for the ethics panel to make a decision. They didn't wait for JD to spin it. Because when the documents are real, the calls are logged, the voices recorded, spin doesn't matter. Survival does. And at the center of it all sat Jasmine Crockett, silent but unyielding. Not a victor, not a villain. Just a woman who had decided to hold the system to the light, regardless of who squinted first. Upstairs, far from the cameras and the glowing screens that now looped Jasmine's takedown on every major feed, the atmosphere in J.D. Vance's war room was suffocating. No windows, just tension and fluorescent lights. The door slammed behind him as he entered, still flushed from the fallout, still gripping the phone like it owed him answers. A half circle of advisors turned from their laptops, waiting, some afraid to breathe. He didn't sit, didn't pause. "Find out who gave her that file," he barked. "I don't care how. I want a name, an address, a leak chart. We've been blindsided, and someone's going to bleed for it." The room sprang into motion, fingers flying over keys, screens blinking open with tracking tools and encrypted logs. But within minutes, their movement slowed, then stopped. The lead cybersecurity advisor, a former NSA contractor with clearance levels higher than most Senate staff, looked up from his screen, lips tight. "Sir, there's nothing to trace." Vance blinked. "What do you mean, nothing?" "No headers, no IP, no shadow bounce. The file came through a masked relay that wiped itself after delivery. Even the metadata inside the PDF was hollow. No timestamps, no authorship, no creation log, just the content, as if someone built the document inside a black box." The silence that followed wasn't confusion, it was dread. Vance stepped closer, towering over the screen. "Check again." "We did. 3 different tools. We ran a forensic sweep on the raw data. It's clean. Too clean. Whoever did this didn't just cover their tracks, they deleted the path behind them." That hit differently. This wasn't some disgruntled intern or careless staffer with access. This was someone trained, someone patient, someone who understood the mechanics of exposure and the anatomy of evasion. Someone who didn't want credit, didn't want revenge, didn't even leave a signature. J.D. Vance backed away from the screen, pulse climbing. Because what he saw now wasn't just a leak. It was a ghost with a mission, one who'd buried their identity so completely that even his team couldn't resurrect it. And that terrified him more than the documents themselves. The room hadn't moved in minutes, but the tremor from what just happened still echoed across the building. In the control room, analysts whispered urgently into headsets. On Twitter, the hashtags multiplying by the second. In boardrooms across DC, emails marked confidential urgent were being opened like fire alarms. The studio lights dimmed slightly as the crew prepared for a long reset, but Jasmine Crockett remained at her seat, centered in stillness. The storm outside no longer concerned her, not because it wasn't dangerous, but because she had already survived its first wave. And in the moments after Vance vanished backstage in a frenzy of rage and retreat, something soft pierced through the noise. A runner approached her desk quietly, clutching an envelope, plain and unmarked except for one handwritten detail in fading blue ink. From Beverly Darnell, Lansing, Michigan. Jasmine's eyes flickered. Her hands moved slowly as she received it, not with suspicion, but with the reverence reserved for memories that arrive when you need them most. She knew that name, not from headlines, not from DC, but from the 7th grade classroom with cracked windows and chalk dust in the corners. Beverly Darnell had taught her history, but more than that, had taught her how to see patterns where others only saw dates. It was Darnell who once paused a lecture on the Bill of Rights to point at Jasmine, 12 years old, furious about a broken school projector, and said, "You're not too loud, you're precise, and someday that will scare people." Jasmine had never forgotten it, and now that woman, retired unseen for years, had sent a letter. No digital timestamp, no grand gesture, just a folded piece of paper inside an old-school envelope, hand-delivered during chaos. Jasmine opened it, slow, careful. There were only 14 words. "You're showing people what courage looks like in real time." That was it. No date, no signature flourish, no explanation. Just that sentence, scrawled in the same looping script Jasmine remembered watching on the blackboard years ago. She didn't cry. She smiled, but not the smile of someone who had just won. Not the smile of vindication. It was something quieter, sadder, stronger. Because that sentence wasn't about evidence. It wasn't about Vance. It was about what the world almost missed in the fury. That truth, when wielded by someone calm, focused, and unwilling to be broken, doesn't just cut, it illuminates. For weeks, Jasmine had endured the smirks, the interruptions, the late-night segments mocking her tone and questioning her credentials. She'd heard every whisper, seen every comment section calling her too much, too angry, too dramatic. She'd held her tongue while men with polished shoes and brittle egos rewrote the rules around her. And now, sitting under the harsh lights of a studio that had just witnessed one of the most complete unravelings of a public figure in recent memory, she was still, because someone had seen, not just the performance, not the headline, not the fire, but the courage in real time. The courage to show up armed not with venom, but with verified records. The courage to wait, to breathe, to not interrupt. The courage to hold up truth with a steady hand while the other side screamed ambush, and someone who mattered had noticed. The envelope sat beside her now, folded once more. Not as a trophy, not as a weapon, but as proof that even in the middle of a televised maelstrom, the real victory wasn't measured in polls or applause. It was measured in the quiet recognition that when you stand in truth, someone always sees it. And sometimes that someone is the person who taught you to speak in the first place. She placed the envelope down gently, her fingers brushing the edge as if grounding herself in the reminder. Truth was never loudest when shouted. It was loudest when proven. But just as the studio began to exhale, producers leaning back, the anchor clearing his throat for a return from break, another wave surged in, unseen but already unavoidable. Jasmine's phone vibrated beneath the folder on her lap. One pulse, then another, then silence. No name, no number, just an encrypted address, 4 characters, a dot, a scrambled domain. Attached, a file, pipeline index memo.zip. She opened it without flinching. No theatrics, no announcement, just her eyes scanning line after line as the studio faded around her. What she saw didn't shake her. It confirmed her worst expectation. Inside the folder, a thread of emails 10 deep, internal, time-stamped, cross-referenced, no redactions, between three sitting senators, identities withheld, but domain headers unmistakably congressional, and a lobbying firm Jasmine had already named minutes earlier. Subject line, Strategic Amendments, Early Access Coordination. One line in particular struck like a cold blade through warm air. Let's sync our phrasing post-call to match the Ohio precedent. It worked for Vance. Her hands stiffened. She didn't speak yet. She just kept reading. Every message mirrored the same tone. Quiet confidence, casual collusion. Terms like expedited compliance, donor reassurance language, and post-vote soft landing. Legal phrases dressed in marketing polish, hiding open-door deals that shaped laws long before they reached public debate. These weren't Vance's fingerprints anymore. This was something else. This wasn't a story about one man's fall. It was about a pattern, replicated, shared, normalized. She tapped the side of the folder twice, a signal to the assistant producer monitoring her feed. He looked up. She didn't nod. She didn't smile. Just turned the screen so that one phrase from the memo filled it. Match the Ohio precedent, and suddenly, what had been a live implosion of one man's narrative began to widen into a breach much larger. This wasn't just corruption, it was choreography. The studio lights brightened again, unaware of the shift. But Jasmine knew. A new game had begun. She turned back toward the anchor's desk, her face unreadable. Not angry, not triumphant, just precise. Across the screen, the phrase, Pipeline Index Memo, appeared in white text over black background. For now, only the control room could see it. But it wouldn't stay there for long, because what Jasmine had in her hands was more than scandal. It was architecture. Blueprints for influence, sold and bought with surgical coordination. She had already lit the fuse under J.D. Vance's credibility, but now she was staring at a document that proved he was just one tile in a much larger mosaic of deceit. And that changed everything. The silence around her wasn't peace. It was compression, the kind that comes before thunder. No studio staff moved. No papers shuffled. Everyone was waiting, breath held. Jasmine didn't say a word, because she didn't have to. Not yet. The file had already spoken, and in the data, metadata untouched, headers intact, was a truth that would ricochet far beyond the confines of one televised takedown. This wasn't personal anymore. It was structural, and the real reckoning had only just begun. The studio floor still echoed with everything that hadn't been said aloud. Behind Jasmine Crockett, the screen had long since gone dark. But in her mind, the next steps burned with clarity. The memo she received wasn't the climax, it was the doorway. And Jasmine Crockett wasn't interested in the noise of virality. She was aiming for something far more dangerous, accountability in rooms that hated the very word. That night, long after the lights went cold and headlines burst across networks, Jasmine didn't go home. She sat in her Capitol Hill office, shoes off, her blazer folded neatly beside a printer, humming with relentless purpose. A folder labeled Addendum, Section 301 Review, Patterns of Influence was slowly being compiled, tabbed, color-coded, and cross-verified against 4 years' worth of archived legislative activity. This wasn't public theater anymore. This was for someone who understood what silence cost. And Jasmine had someone in mind. Senator Elaine Dorsett, not a bomb thrower, not a camera chaser, a former prosecutor turned senator whose presence in the ethics committee had become more symbolic than feared. But Jasmine knew something others overlooked. Dorsett was waiting for someone to give her a reason to move. At 3:12 a.m., the final page of the supplemental report rolled out of the tray. Jasmine signed the cover sheet with a red pen and slid the entire bundle into a sealed envelope. No aides, no emails. Just a direct courier to Dorsett's chief of staff with a handwritten note, for the senator's eyes only. Confidential. Pre-review request. The next day passed without response. No headlines changed. No retweets surged. And Jasmine didn't speak of it, not even to her closest allies. Then at 7:47 p.m. that evening, her private line rang. Unlisted number. She answered with only a quiet, "Crockett." The voice on the other end was male, composed. The senator read it, all of it. Jasmine didn't respond. She waited. A breath. "She wants to see you, off record, tomorrow, 4 p.m., her private conference room, no phones." Click. The line died. And that was it. The elevator up to the 5th floor of the Senate Hart building was silent, save for the slow sweep of red numbers climbing. Jasmine wore no makeup today, no cameras were expected. Her folder was thin, just one page tucked into the leather binder. But her mind carried 100 weights, each one sourced from a broken promise wrapped in lobbyist dollars. The receptionist nodded wordlessly as she arrived. Doors were already unlocked. Inside, Senator Elaine Dorset was standing by the window, arms crossed, her expression unreadable beneath silver-streaked hair in a steel gray suit. No aides, no tea, just the stillness of a woman who had once sent men to prison with nothing but a closing argument. She didn't motion Jasmine to sit. She just spoke. "You didn't leak that file." It wasn't a question. Jasmine shook her head once. "No." Dorset turned slowly. Her eyes were sharp. "And you didn't redact your name from the ethics addendum. I wanted you to know who was standing behind it." There was a long silence. Then Dorset gestured toward the chair. Jasmine sat. The senator remained standing. "You could have made noise. You had it all. The memo, the tape, the trend lines." Dorset's voice was calm but deliberate, like a knife being cleaned. "You didn't come here to burn it all down, did you?" Jasmine's answer was immediate, soft but steady. "No, I came to expose the rot without torching the house." Dorset exhaled. She crossed to the other end of the table and finally sat, hands folded like she was weighing glass. "My office confirmed the metadata," Dorset said. "The memo, it mirrors an old case I prosecuted in '94. Only then, they had the decency to do it over fax." A pause. "Lobbyists, 3 senators, pre-coordinated phrasing. If this unravels publicly, you'll be hunted by both sides." Jasmine met her gaze. "I know. You'll be called the poison." "I'm used to that. And if this goes nowhere, if the committee blocks it, you'll be labeled a partisan stunt." "I didn't write this report to go somewhere. I wrote it because I still believe truth has weight." Dorset leaned back, studying her. Then came the shift, subtle but tectonic. The senator reached for the single sheet Jasmine brought and turned it over, reading the quote Jasmine had included at the bottom. "Sunlight doesn't scream, it shines." The room went still. Dorset finally spoke, not in defense, not in challenge, but in realization. "You didn't come here to make noise," she said quietly. Her eyes rose to meet Jasmine's, and this time, there was something else behind them. Conviction. "You came to make it clear." Jasmine didn't smile, but her shoulders, for the first time in days, relaxed. Dorset set the sheet down. Her voice was calm but final. "All right, Congresswoman, I'll walk this into the committee myself. No staff, no chatter." A pause. "But understand this. If I move, the machinery will move too. And it won't stop with Vance. There are others in those emails who won't go down quietly. You're lighting a corridor full of fuel." Jasmine stood, picking up the empty folder. "Then it's time someone stopped walking in the dark." Dorset gave a single nod. And just like that, Jasmine turned and walked out of the room. Not faster, not slower, but with the quiet gravity of a woman who had not just survived the fire, she had redirected it. But even as private rooms shifted toward investigation and classified corridors whispered of ethics inquiries, the man at the center of the firestorm wasn't finished speaking. Not yet. 48 hours after the confrontation that redefined the broadcast, J.D. Vance stepped onto a gleaming stage set up hastily outside his Ohio campaign headquarters. Flanked by 2 American flags and a podium engraved with his own name, Vance's expression was taut with defiance. Flashbulbs fired like rifle cracks. Anchors murmured in split screens, and live feeds broadcast his every breath across 6 networks. The microphone hissed as he leaned forward. "I stand before you today," Vance began, voice strained through a rehearsed calm, as the target of a deliberate, coordinated political conspiracy. No one gasped, because no one was surprised. This is not about ethics, he continued, gripping the podium harder than needed. This is not about accountability. This is about a vendetta, about silencing conservative voices like mine, using doctored documents and anonymous sources to destroy reputations without evidence. The cameras didn't blink, but the crowd, smaller than usual, older than expected, shifted uncomfortably. There were no cheers, just the low, rustling disquiet of people trying to decide whether they were hearing courage or desperation. Behind him, the giant screen played a reel of talking heads from sympathetic outlets, cropped headlines, split-second freeze frames of Jasmine Crockett with a folder. But none of it could erase what millions had already seen, and none of it could silence the weight of a sentence that now echoed online like gospel. If it's false, sue me. A statement that had become more than a challenge. It had become a battle line. And Vance, in that moment, looked like a man staring across a canyon that was no longer rhetorical, but real. The speech dragged on. He blamed the legacy media. He blamed the DC machine. He blamed what he called radical actors posing as watchdogs. But for every accusation, there was an absence. No direct denial of the memo, no refutation of the audio, no explanation of the time-stamped emails verified by neutral third parties. Only noise, controlled, intentional noise. And the country had moved on. By the time Vance walked off stage, wiping sweat from his brow with a handkerchief that looked too crisp to feel honest, Twitter X had already exploded again, but not in his favor. The phrase, "I'm the victim," began trending, but not how he'd hoped. One user posted a side-by-side, J.D. Vance at the podium, captioned, "I'm the victim," next to a photo of a laid-off single mother in Akron who had been affected by the very policy his vote helped pass. Her sign read, "I'm the collateral." Another post showed a split screen, Jasmine Crockett holding up documented proof, and J.D. Vance yelling into a mic. The caption? One brought receipts, the other brought excuses. A live poll from Morning Results showed a brutal number. 71% of respondents believe Jasmine. Only 19% believe Vance. The rest chose, too afraid to say what they believe. By 6 p.m., the number "not the victim" hashtag had hit 2.8 million uses. And even worse, for Vance, it wasn't just voters. Even loyal surrogates on smaller networks began to shift. On one conservative panel, a former strategist who had once helped run Vance's PAC uttered a line that caught fire instantly. He says it's a witch hunt, but witches don't usually come with email headers and verified signatures. Inside the media control rooms, anchors didn't hide their tone anymore. One muttered live, "This is a man grasping at air while drowning in facts." Another, "He brought flags and flags alone." And perhaps the sharpest knife came from a legal analyst on a center-right stream. When someone is innocent, they don't scream conspiracy. They scream proof. Vance hasn't shown any. Elsewhere, Jasmine Crockett remained quiet. She gave no press conference. She posted no threads. But her silence spoke louder than Vance's entire podium performance. Because while JD shouted victimhood into cameras, Jasmine was still in the shadows, sending packets, compiling crosswalks between donation patterns and legislation timelines, letting truth ferment while ego tried to reclaim the narrative. And people noticed. A comment with over 230,000 likes read simply, "Vance said political hit job." Jasmine said nothing, because she didn't need to. Meanwhile, on the ground in Ohio, local volunteers began peeling off Vance's campaign stickers from windows. One coffee shop that had hosted a fundraiser 2 months prior issued a statement online. "We believe in integrity. That starts with accountability. We are reevaluating our endorsements." By morning, 5 major donors had pulled soft money pledges, and a 6th, when asked anonymously, responded, "We don't fund panic, especially not when it comes dressed as patriotism." And still, J.D. Vance clung to the podium long after the crowd had stopped applauding. He issued one final plea, his voice rising, "I won't be silenced. I won't be canceled. I will stand firm against this injustice." But the problem wasn't cancellation. It was clarity. And the people? They didn't see a man being hunted. They saw a man finally cornered by the consequences of his own shadow. Even as J.D. Vance's media tour sputtered into desperation and hashtags carved themselves into the skin of national headlines, Jasmine Crockett did not speak. She didn't tour morning shows. She didn't accept a single podcast invite. No camera crew parked outside her door. While the world screamed, she went quiet, not as retreat, but as refinement. And in that stillness, she worked. Inside a modest office lit by warm lamplight and the glow of a muted TV in the corner, Jasmine sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by envelopes, some crumpled, some hand-decorated, some folded neatly with trembling reverence. They came from everywhere: Michigan steelworkers, Arizona teachers, North Carolina farmers, a retired woman in Queens who said she cried during Jasmine's final sentence. Each letter pulsed with truth. None were read aloud for clicks. Beside her sat a polished wooden box, engraved not with her name, but a word: witness. And as she opened one envelope after another, she didn't just read the stories, she memorized them. A boy named Malik from Detroit wrote, "I didn't think people like you even got inside those rooms. Now I know they can." A woman named Denise from Tulsa scribbled her message on the back of a Walmart receipt: "They took my job, but they didn't take my voice. Thank you for using yours." Jasmine folded each one with care, brushing the corners flat with the side of her hand. She placed them inside the box like sacred offerings, not to her, but to the truth they represented. Not trophies, not applause, testimonies. Then came a knock. Rami, her longtime aide, strategist, and in moments like this, her anchor, stepped inside without a word. He didn't ask why the lights were dimmed, why she hadn't returned a single call in 3 days. He already knew. The real fight wasn't over. It had just gone underground. She glanced up. "Did the senator call again?" Rami nodded. "Twice. She says press is begging for a follow-up. Editorials are pouring in." Jasmine reached for another envelope instead of answering. She read, folded, slipped it in. Finally, she looked up at him, eyes not tired, but sharpened, quiet like the air before a storm. "You know what comes next, don't you?" she said. Rami hesitated. "Retaliation?" She smiled faintly. "Revision." He tilted his head. "They'll rewrite it," she murmured. "All of it. Not now, but soon. They'll come back around, smiling, quoting me, pretending they were on this side the whole time." A pause stretched long enough for the television screen to flicker with an ad for a pharmaceutical lobbyist gala. She nodded toward the letters. "These people, Malik, Denise, the nurse from Richmond, they're not here to forget. They're here to remind." Rami stepped closer. "So what do we do?" She reached for the lid of the wooden box, now filled nearly to the brim with voices the news cycle would soon try to drown, and she whispered, "We remember for them." Then she stood, walked slowly to her desk, and slid the box into a narrow shelf marked 2024. Next to it sat another folder, thicker than the rest, labeled, "To be used only when they lie again." She turned to Rami, pulled her blazer over her shoulders like armor, and walked to the door. Before exiting, she glanced down at his worn leather boots. "You might want thicker soles," she said. He blinked. "Why?" Jasmine's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "Because the next time they come back here, smiling, faking loyalty, they'll say they've always supported this, that they stood with us, that they never doubted, and we'll hear it again and again in offices and airports and camera pits." She opened the door and looked back one last time. "So bring sturdy shoes, Rami. There'll be a lot of footsteps walking in reverse. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference. In the heart of a tense congressional hearing, Jasmine Crockett goes head-to-head with the relentless Marjorie Taylor Greene as a battle of words spirals into a fight for political survival. With the nation watching, Jasmine is ruthlessly attacked, her integrity dragged through the mud, her career thrown into jeopardy. Greene's accusations are brutal, personal, and designed to break her. But Jasmine doesn't lash out. She stands her ground, calm and poised, armed with nothing but cold, hard truth and undeniable evidence. In just 90 seconds, she exposes Green's dirtiest tactics, shattering her opponent's narrative and flipping the entire debate on its head. Can one woman armed with integrity change the course of American politics? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. It began like any other congressional hearing, wood striking marble, cameras panning across solemn faces, the hum of policy jargon building in the background. But when Marjorie Taylor Greene leaned into her microphone, everything detonated. Clad in a stark white blazer in defiance, she bypassed all decorum. No opening on immigration reform, no nod to the panel. Instead, she fixed her gaze on Jasmine Crockett, seated calmly at the witness table, like a storm waiting its turn. "Let's cut the pretense," Greene declared, her southern drawl sharpened into a dagger. "This hearing isn't about fixing the border. It's about giving washed-up Democrats like Ms. Crockett a few more minutes on prime time before their careers flatline." The room tensed like a rubber band stretched to breaking. Even veteran aides froze mid-note. Jasmine Crockett calls herself a civil rights attorney, but what's she really done? Her district is overrun with crime, her record is paper-thin, and the only place she seems to fight is on social media. Jasmine didn't blink, but Greene's words hit with calculated force. Less policy critique, more character assassination. At 43, Ms. Crockett is a walking fossil in a party that's sprinting towards socialism and leaving moderates behind. She's not here to bring substance. She's here to cling to a spotlight that's quickly slipping away. Audible gasps rose from the gallery. Journalists glanced at each other. The CNN Chiron adjusted mid-sentence. Greene wasn't debating. She was launching a political airstrike. And Jasmine, still silent, refused to bite. Not yet. Not with rage. Her hands didn't move. Her lips didn't tighten. But her eyes, those eyes, locked onto Greene with the quiet fury of someone who'd been underestimated before. This wasn't debate. This was a public attempt at erasure. And the country wasn't just watching a hearing anymore. They were witnessing the opening salvo of a war between two women, and one of them had just thrown the first match onto a floor soaked in gasoline. And yet, through the wreckage of words Marjorie Taylor Greene hurled across the chamber, Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch, not because she wasn't bleeding, but because she had already chosen her weapon. While Greene ranted, Jasmine sat at the heart of the hearing room like the eye of a hurricane, calm, centered, unmoving. The walls buzzed with tension, journalists whispering behind their press badges, camera lenses silently zooming in for signs of a crack. But Jasmine gave them nothing. Her hands rested atop a leather-bound folder, fingers steepled in eerie stillness, her gaze never straying from Greene's contorted expression. Beneath the surface, her pulse ticked like a metronome wound tight, but her mind, sharp as ever, was already calculating. She waited. Waited not for her turn to speak, but for the precise moment to strike with something heavier than retaliation. Then slowly, so subtly it was almost invisible, she reached into the inside lining of her bag, pulling out a small folded piece of aged paper. It was worn, creased at the edges, a remnant from another battle, another betrayal, and as she slipped it into the back flap of her testimony file, the entire energy around her seemed to shift. This was no longer a defense. It was the prelude to an execution. She didn't wait for applause. She didn't raise her voice. When Jasmine Crockett leaned into the microphone, it wasn't to retaliate. It was to restore gravity to a chamber that had been hijacked by spectacle. The moment was razor thin, suspended between outrage and control, but Jasmine chose the harder path. Restraint sharpened into precision. Her breath was steady, her eyes forward. And when she spoke, her voice was neither cold nor fiery. It was something more terrifying to opponents, undeniably clear. "I appreciate the opportunity to respond," she began, and even that simple sentence landed like a brick in water. "I sat here while my name, my work, and my purpose were dragged through the mud, not by someone asking about policy, but by someone desperate to turn governance into gossip." The room didn't stir. It held its breath. Her tone was low, grounded, with the weight of lived experience behind every syllable. So let me speak, not just to the insult, but to the record. She turned one page in her folder, her fingers calm, movements methodical, like someone assembling evidence for a jury she knew was watching. I began my career not in a press booth, but in courtrooms no one wanted to walk into. Courtrooms where families cried because insurance fraud had left them bankrupt while CEOs bought jets. She paused. Let that hang. I led investigations into those schemes. I didn't tweet about injustice. I prosecuted it. Her voice tightened, not with emotion, but with deliberate focus. In Texas, I helped dismantle a multi-state human trafficking operation that targeted Black and Latina girls. Girls the system ignored, girls no headline mentioned, girls whose names no one remembered but mine. Her hand hovered above the next page, then pressed it down. And before some of my colleagues could spell fentanyl, I was filing lawsuits against pharmaceutical giants. Yes, the same ones now donating to campaigns. Because justice doesn't wait for polling data. She paused again. Not for drama, but for clarity. So when Ms. Green questions my relevance, let me be painfully clear. I didn't chase relevance. Relevance chased me when people in power refused to show up. I was the one who stayed. Her voice dropped half a register, not louder but deeper, more intimate, more lethal. I do not measure my worth by screen time. I measure it by the lives restored when systems fail. And yes, I'm still here. Not because I begged for a spotlight, but because when things break, I know how to fix them. She looked up finally, locking eyes with Green. Not with hatred, but with the stillness of someone who had stood alone in rooms full of noise before, and never once lowered her standards to match the volume. In that silence, no one could miss the shift. This was no longer defense, it was declaration. And the insult that had opened this hearing had just been drowned beneath the weight of a career spent in trenches far deeper than a camera could ever see. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't finished, because when you weaponize someone's identity, you invite the kind of truth that doesn't whisper, it detonates. And now, as Marjorie Taylor Greene sat stewing in the echo of her own performance, Jasmine made a deliberate move, not to retaliate, but to reveal. Her fingers moved without hurry, unfolding the aged piece of paper she had hidden in the inner sleeve of her binder minutes earlier. Not a prop, not a gimmick, a printed memory, a mirror Marjorie never expected to see held up, least of all in front of the nation. Jasmine didn't immediately speak. She let the paper hover in her hands, letting its weight become visible, its significance radiating outward in silence. The tension inside the chamber coiled again. Even the usual whispers that fill the corners of hearings, the rustle of aides, the clicking of pens, faded beneath the rising anticipation. The paper itself looked like something saved, not printed for effect. The edges slightly curled, the crease down the middle soft from being folded, unfolded, and folded again. A document carried not out of vanity, but necessity, carried by a woman who knew exactly how often truth was treated as disposable until it became undeniable. I wasn't planning to bring this out, Jasmine said, her voice low but unmistakably anchored. But when someone rewrites history in real time, someone needs to remind the room what actually happened. She paused, eyes locked on Marjorie across the table. Not years ago, not decades, just 4 years back. She held the page higher, angling it slightly so the cameras could catch the header at the top. The Dartmouth Free Press, 2019 interview. Green on political civility. The words were black and white. Permanent. Uneditable now. Jasmine's voice was clear, without performative outrage. Just the slow, surgical rhythm of a prosecutor unsealing a file the jury never expected to hear. In 2019, she continued, long before the green room lights, long before the coordinated talking points, Congresswoman Green gave a college interview. In that piece, she spoke at length about the erosion of political discourse. Another pause, intentional, unhurried. And I quote, "We need fewer attacks and more accountability. I admire people like Jasmine Crockett, who prosecute injustice no matter who's in power, and who understand that real courage means staying above the noise." The impact was immediate. Green froze. The composure she'd clung to through previous exchanges now cracking beneath the weight of her own words. Her hand twitched slightly, reaching for a pen that she didn't need, any motion to regain grounding. But nothing could soften what had just been unleashed. The room didn't erupt in chaos. It collapsed into silence. Not dead silence, charged silence. The kind that follows a long-buried truth surfacing where it's least welcome. Jasmine let the quote settle. She placed the paper gently on the desk, smoothing the edge with her palm, like someone tucking in a document for the record. Then, with eyes that didn't blink and a voice that cut deeper by staying measured, she spoke again. "I remember reading those words back then," she said. "They didn't flatter me. They didn't benefit me, but they reflected something rare, honest recognition of public service across political lines. And they meant something until today." The words tightened like a noose, not shouted but precise, unrelenting. Because what we just witnessed wasn't a disagreement, it was character assassination. The very thing you once said was destroying our democracy. The very thing you said you stood against. Jasmine leaned forward slightly, not looming, but steady, anchoring herself into the center of the chamber, as if daring the walls themselves to deny what she was saying. "So now I ask you, on this record, on this floor, on this broadcast, when did you decide that what you believed no longer served you? When did admiration turn into amnesia?" She held Green's gaze, giving her no out, no distraction. "Was it when I refused to be silent about voter suppression? Was it when I challenged billion-dollar drug companies in a courtroom instead of just tweeting about them? Or was it simply when you learned that undermining me would get more clicks than quoting me ever did?" The final sentence struck with a truth so sharp it left the air between them carved clean. Jasmine didn't move to gloat. She didn't raise her voice in triumph. She sat back, spine straight, letting her silence finish what her words had begun. The message was clear. You don't get to rewrite history when someone still has the receipts. Across the room, staffers avoided eye contact. Reporters whispered furiously into phones. The C-SPAN feed zoomed in slowly, instinctively, onto Green's face, now drained not of color, but of certainty. And though the gavel hadn't fallen, it felt like a verdict had already been delivered. This was no longer a hearing. It was a reckoning. The silence in the chamber was suffocating. It wasn't just the stillness of a moment suspended. It was the kind of silence that followed the impact of a blow. Jasmine Crockett sat there, her body perfectly composed, but her presence commanding. The weight of her words still hung in the air, lingering like smoke after a fire. Marjorie Taylor Greene had delivered her personal assault with all the malice of a woman accustomed to breaking things with words. But Jasmine wasn't breaking. She was building something, and those in the room, audience and lawmakers alike, knew it. As the room held its collective breath, Jasmine didn't rush to fill the silence. She knew this moment was hers to claim, and she claimed it in silence. Slowly, deliberately, she shifted in her seat, her posture still relaxed. But there was a quiet confidence in the way she held herself. Her fingers brushed lightly over the edges of her binder, but she didn't immediately open it. No, she would wait. She would make them wait, because she knew something they didn't. The real battle wasn't in the back and forth of insults. It was in the facts, the truth, the things that couldn't be twisted, and she had them all. Finally, when it was time, Jasmine spoke again, her voice quiet at first, but unmistakable, clear, and steady, like a warning whispered just before the storm hit. "I came here today to talk about solutions. I came here to discuss the very real issues facing the people of Texas, the issues they live with every single day. The crisis at the border isn't just a political talking point for me. It's personal. It's about the families I represent, the communities I fight for." Her eyes stayed locked on Green's, unwavering. There was no trace of anger in her expression, only something far more dangerous, dispassionate truth. But instead of hearing about policies or solutions today, what did we get? A personal attack, a smear campaign disguised as debate. The weight of her words settled like a heavy burden in the air. She wasn't just speaking to Green anymore. She was speaking to everyone listening, to the nation, to the lawmakers, to anyone who might think this was just another show. Ms. Green has decided that the hearing today isn't about the issues that matter. It's about making me the target of her political theater. Jasmine's fingers gripped the edges of her binder a little tighter now, a subtle movement that didn't break her calm, but served as a reminder of the control she held over the situation. And while I came here ready to engage on the issues, I won't sit quietly while my character's attacked. You see, Miss Green, when someone makes an accusation like that, they open the door to the truth. And when that door's opened, I'll walk right through it, and I'll walk through it with facts. Her voice didn't rise, but there was a steel edge now, something that carried through every syllable, each word deliberate, measured, and lethal. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to scream. She just needed to speak with the kind of quiet certainty that left no room for doubt. I didn't come here to defend myself from petty insults. I came here to defend the truth. And if Ms. Green wants to make this personal, then I'll make it a fight she's not prepared for. Her eyes locked again with Green's. She could see the flicker in her opponent's gaze now, the uncertainty, the realization that she had crossed a line, that the battlefield had shifted. Jasmine reached forward then, opening her binder with slow, deliberate motions, every turn of the page an exhale of quiet intent. She wasn't trying to rush. She wasn't trying to intimidate. She was simply gathering her ammunition, ready to lay it out for all to see. I don't need to stand here and yell. I don't need to get emotional. What I have are records. I have the truth. And I will show you what real accountability looks like, because that's what I came here to talk about today. The tension in the room was suffocating. The instant the document left Jasmine Crockett's hands and floated into view, the atmosphere shifted, not just in the chamber, but across the entire televised nation watching. She didn't need to speak first. The power of her silence, the slow unfolding of a single sheet of paper, was far more potent than any words she could have mustered. The chamber felt smaller now, suffocating under the weight of what was about to happen. Jasmine was no longer defending herself. She was setting the stage for a public reckoning. The memo wasn't a simple sheet of paper. To Levitt, it was a death sentence. As Jasmine held it up, there was no fanfare, no dramatic pause, just the sharp, unmistakable clarity of truth being exposed for all to see. A memo from Marjorie Taylor Greene's own communications team telling her staff to prioritize personal attacks on Crockett because, in their words, she knows policy better than we do. It was like holding up a mirror to someone who thought they could manipulate the reflection. The room froze. Everyone could feel it. The stakes had just been raised, and now there was nowhere to hide. Jasmine's eyes were steady, unflinching, and as the memo hung between them, she could sense the shift. This wasn't just about policy anymore. It was about exposure, about unmasking the true tactics behind the soundbites. And Green knew it. Her face lost color almost instantly, her confident demeanor slipping away, like sand through fingers. The very woman who had tried to tear down Jasmine's character, who had used every ounce of political energy to strike below the belt, now found herself on the receiving end of an attack she couldn't escape. For the first time in the hearing, there was no snarky retort, no snide comment, only a woman who was visibly caught in the web of her own lies. The room held its collective breath as Green fumbled for words, her mind scrambling to patch together some form of defense. Her voice shook when it came, but there was no conviction in it. That's not what it means, she stammered, the crack in her voice almost audible over the low murmurs in the room. It was taken out of context, she tried again, as if repeating it would somehow make it true. But even as she spoke, the cracks in her armor deepened, and the room could feel the unspoken truth hanging heavy in the air. This wasn't a slip of the tongue. This was her entire strategy unraveling in front of a live audience. Jasmine remained perfectly still, her eyes unwavering, like a prosecutor watching a witness sweat under cross-examination. She didn't need to rush. She didn't need to shout. Every second of silence stretched out, letting the weight of the moment sink in. Finally, when Jasmine spoke again, her voice was deliberate, measured, each word carved with precision. It's not taken out of context, Ms. Levitt. This is your playbook. You've made it clear. You were told to attack me personally because I've consistently beaten you on the facts. You're not interested in solutions. You're interested in destroying anyone who knows more than you. The chamber was still. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every second of this transformation. Jasmine wasn't just defending herself. She was dismantling the narrative Green had so carefully constructed, piece by piece. The fight had shifted. Jasmine wasn't playing by Green's rules anymore. She wasn't responding to her petty insults or twisted accusations. She was simply showing the world the truth. Her gaze didn't falter as she continued, her voice still steady, but now it carried the full weight of someone who had been through battles like this before and had always emerged victorious. This memo doesn't just expose you, it exposes everything about how the game is played in Washington. You don't want solutions. You want to tear down anyone who threatens your agenda. She paused, letting the words sink in. But what you fail to understand, Ms. Levitt, is that this country needs more than destruction. We need people who can stand up, who can debate the issues, and who can actually bring real change to the table. And that's something you'll never be able to take away from me. Levitt's response came, but it was weak, barely a defense at all. She tried to backtrack, to reframe the memo, but the truth had already been set free. It was out there, and no amount of shouting, no matter how loud or defensive, could erase it. The damage was done. Jasmine had exposed the heart of the hypocrisy, the manipulation and political gamesmanship that had been used to undermine not just her, but the very process of this hearing. And in this moment, Jasmine had won. It wasn't just about defending her honor. It was about showing everyone in the room, and everyone watching at home, the truth, when delivered with integrity, could cut through the noise and reach straight to the heart of the matter. As the chamber simmered in the stunned silence, Jasmine Crockett sat there, unyielding and calm, her presence now undeniable. She had taken control of the narrative, and with the truth in hand, no one could refute it. The room was heavy with the silence that followed Jasmine's revelation. It wasn't the kind of silence that fills a space after a dramatic argument. It was the kind of silence that signals the moment when everything changes. Jasmine Crockett wasn't just holding her ground anymore. She was reshaping the narrative, reclaiming the moment in a way that only a woman who had spent years in the trenches of public service could. But this wasn't just a fight for herself. This was a fight for everyone watching at home. Everyone who had ever wondered if there was more to politics than the circus that the media often portrayed. As she turned toward the cameras, the air seemed to thicken with anticipation. Her eyes locked with the lens, the sharpness of her gaze cutting through the clutter of noise in the room. She wasn't just speaking to the people in that chamber anymore. She was speaking to every single person watching. She knew the stakes, and with each word, she made it clear that she had come for more than just a political debate. She had come for accountability. This, Jasmine began, her voice calm, but every syllable filled with the weight of years of frustration and resolve, is why America can't solve the border crisis. It's why we haven't been able to tackle the real problems facing our country, because we've allowed ourselves to be distracted by petty personal attacks instead of focusing on what really matters. She paused, allowing the weight of her statement to sink into the room. The lawmaker sitting across from her, and everyone watching, felt the magnitude of her words. Her eyes didn't stray from the lens. She wasn't speaking just for her district, just for Texas. She was speaking for the millions who were tired of the status quo. "This isn't about me. It's not about any one person," she said, the sharpness in her voice unmistakable. "It's about the people who wake up every single day, facing the real consequences of inaction. It's about the families caught in the middle of a broken system. And yet here we are, watching someone turn a serious issue into a spectacle while the crisis continues to worsen." The silence that followed was thick. It wasn't just the audience holding their breath. It was the world waiting for her next move, knowing that Jasmine wasn't here to play games. She wasn't here to let the game be defined by sound bites and empty accusations. She was here to redefine what accountability meant. Her tone softened for just a moment, but the message was clear, cutting through the tension like a surgeon's scalpel. "I didn't come here today to engage in personal attacks. I came here to talk about real solutions to the border crisis. I came here to represent the people who can't afford to waste time on political theatrics." Her voice remained even, but there was an unmistakable resolve. And yet here we are, caught in the middle of someone's attempt to tear me down rather than engaging on the issues that truly matter. Jasmine leaned forward just slightly, as if to close the distance between herself and Green. The stillness of the room was almost suffocating, but Jasmine's presence seemed to expand, filling every inch of the space. "You chose to play a game, Ms. Green," she continued, her voice now low but carrying an intensity that commanded attention. "You chose to attack me personally, not because of anything I've done, but because you couldn't compete on policy. You knew I was too prepared, too experienced, so you decided to play dirty." She reached for her binder, slowly flipping through the pages, deliberately, as if every second mattered. This wasn't just a retort. It wasn't an emotional response. It was calculated, like a seasoned litigator preparing for closing statements. She stopped at the right page, her eyes momentarily scanning the document. When she spoke again, her voice was still calm, but the weight of her words made the chamber feel like it had shrunk even further. "I don't hate you, Ms. Green," Jasmine said, the words landing like a hammer. "But what you've done here today, what you continue to do, is something I will not stand by. I will hold you accountable for choosing a path that damages our democracy, that weakens the very fabric of our political discourse." Her gaze never wavered. "And I will make sure you face the consequences for that choice." There was no malice in her words, no fury in her voice. There was only a quiet, unwavering determination that left no room for doubt. Jasmine wasn't speaking to a person anymore. She was speaking to a legacy of political manipulation that had done nothing but divide the country for far too long. "I'm not here to tear you down, Mrs. Green," she continued, "but you've shown the world exactly what happens when we choose personal destruction over progress. You've made your choice, and now I'm going to hold you accountable for it." The room seemed to hold its collective breath, the pressure building as Jasmine finished. This wasn't a personal vendetta. It wasn't a call for revenge. It was an assertion, a statement that would echo far beyond the confines of the hearing room. Jasmine had made it clear. She wasn't just defending herself. She was defending something much greater, the very principles of fairness, integrity, and justice that should guide this nation's political discourse. The tension in the room was almost unbearable. Jasmine Crockett had just exposed the heart of Marjorie Taylor Greene's strategy, and the aftermath of that revelation was thick with anticipation. Jasmine's words still hung in the air, their weight sinking into every corner of the chamber. Greene, for the first time in the hearing, was speechless, caught in the web of her own manipulation, desperately searching for a way out. Jasmine, however, didn't rush. She didn't need to. She knew exactly what was coming next. The room felt like it was holding its breath, every gaze fixed on Greene as the silence stretched on, suffocating. Jasmine was calm, too calm, and yet there was a fire behind her eyes that couldn't be ignored. She laid her case with precision, unveiling the personal attacks, the backroom games, and the hypocrisy that had been hidden in plain sight. But she wasn't done yet. The moment had arrived to push the conversation forward, to steer it back to what had been derailed by the distractions of petty attacks. She leaned forward slightly, her hands resting lightly on the table as she addressed the room with quiet authority. "I didn't come here today for this." Her voice didn't rise, but each word carried the weight of someone who had seen this political game played before and who refused to let it go any further. "I came here to discuss policy, to discuss real solutions to the border crisis that our country faces." The words hung in the air, a challenge, a demand. She wasn't just speaking to Greene anymore. She was speaking to the nation, the viewers at home, the lawmakers in the room, anyone who had ever been frustrated by the constant political theater that seemed to overshadow real progress. Jasmine's gaze never left Greene's face, her eyes piercing through the remnants of Greene's bravado. "But instead of discussing the issues that matter, we've been subjected to a spectacle where personal attacks, not policies, are the focus, where character assassination is prioritized over finding real solutions." Her voice, though calm, began to pick up a steady rhythm, building like the calm before a storm. "This isn't just about me, Ms. Greene. This is about all of us. This is about the country that has been forced to endure more of your divisive rhetoric and less of the leadership we need. The room shifted slightly as Jasmine's words landed. A few heads nodded, while others stayed still, caught in the tension of what was unfolding. Green was on the defensive now, and Jasmine knew she had her pinned. Jasmine didn't let the moment pass, though. She didn't let the narrative slip back into the chaos Green had tried to create. "So here's my offer, Ms. Green," Jasmine continued, her voice steady, sharp, like the click of a hammer on a pistol. "Let's put aside the personal attacks. Let's get back to what we're actually here for." She didn't wait for Green to respond immediately. She was dictating the pace now. Jasmine's eyes never left Green's as she spoke again, her tone uncompromising, her resolve unshakable. "You see, I'm here to discuss policy. We're here to talk about the border crisis, and I'm ready to move forward if you are. But if you're going to continue to deflect, to avoid engaging in the real issues because you can't win on the facts, then I'll have no choice but to hold you accountable for that too." Green shifted in her seat, her expression hardening as she realized Jasmine wasn't giving her an out. She had no place to hide now. Every attempt Green had made to attack Jasmine had backfired, and now the entire focus had shifted back to the real issues. The battle had moved from personal insults to the real politic of governing, and Jasmine had just set the terms for the debate. Green opened her mouth, but the words didn't come as easily now. Jasmine had tied her hands, cornered her with a choice she couldn't escape: engage on the issues or confirm everything Jasmine had just exposed. Green knew in that moment that any attempt to further deflect would only confirm her guilt, that the personal attacks weren't about policy at all. It was a game, and she had been playing the wrong one. Jasmine didn't wait for Green to recover. She knew the decision had already been made. Green had to choose: stay trapped in her personal vendetta or turn back to the real work they had come here to do. Jasmine's eyes softened for a moment, but the message remained clear. "I'm ready to move on to the real conversation," she said. "I'm ready to discuss the border, the solutions we can create together, not this circus. But if you're not ready to let the politics of personal destruction go, then I'll be forced to keep showing the world exactly who you are." She paused, letting that hang in the air, letting Green see the road ahead. "It's your choice. Let's talk policy, or let's keep playing this game. But one thing is certain: this game has gone on long enough, and it's time to face the facts." There was no immediate response from Green, but Jasmine knew the answer. It had already been decided. Green had lost, and now they would talk about the issues that mattered. The room was electric with tension, the air thick with the weight of what had just transpired. Jasmine Crockett had delivered her unrelenting truth, piece by piece, provision by provision. She wasn't just reading from the bill anymore. She was deconstructing it, exposing its flaws and hypocrisies. Her hands moved with purpose, flipping the pages with the precision of someone who had spent not just hours, but years mastering the nuances of policy. Each word that left her mouth was deliberate, calculated, and it cut through the room like a surgeon's scalpel. Jasmine's voice didn't rise in volume, but the force behind it was undeniable. "Section 5.2, she began, her eyes never leaving the document. "It proposes increasing funding for Border Patrol, but what it doesn't address is the systemic failure of the system. We can throw money at the problem, but without a comprehensive immigration plan, we are just creating a larger, more inefficient bureaucracy. What's the point of building more walls when we're failing to manage the people on the ground?" Her tone was low, deliberate, but each word was like a strike, each sentence driving deeper into the core of the argument. This wasn't a policy debate anymore. It was a challenge to the very foundation of the bill's premise. Marjorie Taylor Greene's face tightened. The questions Jasmine asked weren't rhetorical. They were precise, backed by a wealth of knowledge and expertise that couldn't be dismissed. Marjorie Taylor Greene, caught off guard by the depth of Jasmine's understanding, flipped through her own papers, clearly trying to find something to counter the points being made. She fumbled, the papers in her hands trembling as she searched for a response. The discomfort was evident, but Jasmine's focus never wavered. "Let's talk about Section 8.4, Jasmine continued, her voice calm but relentless. "It talks about implementing new enforcement measures, but what it fails to mention is the human cost. How do you plan to deal with the families being separated, the children in cages, the human rights violations that continue to happen on a daily basis? These are not just statistics, Ms. Marjorie Taylor Greene. These are people, real people with faces, with families, with lives that are being torn apart because of this misguided policy. She wasn't just quoting provisions from the bill anymore. She was making it personal, connecting the dots between policy and the human beings who lived its consequences. Marjorie Taylor Greene opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught in her throat. Jasmine wasn't giving her room to breathe, wasn't allowing her to deflect or hide behind hollow rhetoric. She wasn't just making a case for policy change. She was holding Marjorie Taylor Greene accountable for the lives that were affected by the policies she championed. Jasmine leaned in slightly, her gaze sharp, cutting through the atmosphere of the room like a knife. You want to talk about the border crisis, Ms. Marjorie Taylor Greene? Then we need to talk about the whole crisis, not just the rhetoric you're selling, but the reality we're facing. Marjorie Taylor Greene shifted in her seat, her discomfort palpable. She tried to gather her thoughts to cling to the few talking points she had prepared, but they were slipping away, lost to the relentless tide of Jasmine's questions. Jasmine wasn't just winning this debate, she was exposing the fundamental flaws in the argument, forcing Marjorie Taylor Greene to confront the truth in front of a live audience. Section 10.1, Jasmine went on, her voice still unwavering, it talks about strengthening border security, but it does so without any consideration of the infrastructure needed to support it. What's the point of additional security measures when the system behind them is so broken that it can't even process people properly? She paused, letting the question hang in the air. We're talking about people's lives, Miss Marjorie Taylor Greene, not political points. You want to fix the problem, but you're not even willing to confront the systems that are causing it in the first place. Marjorie Taylor Greene's response was nothing more than a weak attempt to shift the conversation back to the same worn-out talking points. Her voice wavered as she spoke, trying to cling to the lines she had rehearsed. But Jasmine's control over the narrative was absolute. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Each statement she made was more than just a question. It was a call to action, a demand for accountability. Ms. Marjorie Taylor Greene, Jasmine said, her eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that could freeze anyone in their tracks. You're so focused on enforcing laws that you've forgotten what it means to be human. This isn't just about policies. It's about the people caught in the crossfire. And until you acknowledge that, you're just spinning your wheels. Marjorie Taylor Greene's face was a mixture of frustration and disbelief, but there was no escaping the facts Jasmine had laid bare. She had nowhere to hide. The questions had been asked, the answers exposed, and it was clear that Jasmine wasn't just the better debater, she was the better leader. Jasmine had made it clear, this wasn't about personal attacks, and it never had been. This was about holding those in power accountable for the decisions they made, and ensuring that those decisions didn't come at the cost of innocent lives. The room was silent, the weight of Jasmine's words hanging in the air as she slowly began to turn the page. The game had changed, and Marjorie Taylor Greene had no choice but to follow. The aftermath of Jasmine Crockett's masterclass in political discourse was nothing short of explosive. What had begun as a simple exchange of words in a heated congressional hearing had erupted into a viral phenomenon, the shock waves of which reverberated across the entire nation. The truth she had so methodically exposed had found its way into the homes of millions, transcending party lines, captivating a diverse audience, and forcing them to confront the raw honesty that had cut through the usual political noise. The immediate impact was undeniable. The clip of Jasmine's confrontation with Marjorie Taylor Greene began to spread like wildfire. News outlets were running it on an endless loop, pundits dissecting every second, breaking down Jasmine's delivery, her poise, and the absolute precision with which she had dismantled Greene's personal attack. It wasn't just a political debate, it was a moment of reckoning. For days, the clip dominated social media feeds, and the hashtag number Jasmine brings evidence trended, gathering momentum as more and more people saw the clarity and strength behind her words. The phrase Levitt brings personal attacks, Crockett brings the facts, became a rallying cry for those who had grown tired of the political theatrics that seemed to dominate every news cycle. It was no longer about the specifics of the border debate. It was about something deeper, something more fundamental. It was about restoring integrity to politics and rejecting the age-old tactic of smearing one's opponent to gain political leverage. Jasmine had done something unprecedented. She had turned the tables in the middle of a storm, and now the storm was hers to control. Across platforms, people, from grassroots activists to seasoned political analysts, began to echo the sentiment. Jasmine Crockett brought the receipts. Marjorie Taylor Greene brought the dirt, read one tweet. It wasn't just a viral hashtag, it was a movement, a shift in the way politics would be viewed moving forward. Jasmine didn't just make a compelling case for her district, for her policies. She redefined what it meant to stand up to the lies and distractions that had consumed the political discourse for too long. The fallout for Marjorie Taylor Greene and her team was swift and unforgiving. The carefully constructed narrative they had tried to weave, where personal attacks replaced policy discussion, began to unravel before their eyes. The entire communications team that had been responsible for orchestrating Greene's attack on Jasmine found themselves scrambling to regain control. The backlash was immediate. Within 48 hours, 3 senior members of Levitt's communications team were quietly forced out of their positions, their professional careers now marked by their failed strategy. Their departure was swift, and it wasn't just a whisper in the corridors of power. It was a public acknowledgement of their failure. They had miscalculated, and the cost was their livelihoods. The humiliation wasn't just personal, it was professional. The entire organization that had backed Levitt's campaign began to fall into chaos. News of the resignations spread quickly through the political press, and soon it wasn't just about who had resigned, it was about who was left standing. Levitt, once seen as a rising star within the GOP, now found herself backed into a corner, unable to recover from the damage done in the public eye. Her attempts to shift the conversation back to the issues were hollow, falling flat against the overwhelming tide of criticism and public scrutiny. The media machine that had once worked tirelessly to propel her career was now turning against her, feeding the narrative that she was unprepared for the weight of the office she sought to hold. Behind closed doors, the turmoil continued. The once impressive apparatus that had supported Levitt's rise was now in disarray. Levitt's staff, rattled by the swift and unexpected resignation of their most senior members, scrambled to understand where everything had gone wrong. The strategy of focusing on personal attacks, of undermining an opponent's character to advance their own agenda, had been a calculated risk, and it had backfired spectacularly. The organization was in crisis mode, unsure of how to move forward, caught in the web of a political storm they could no longer control. The damage wasn't just internal, it was also external, bleeding into the public perception of Levitt's campaign. Her credibility was shattered. No amount of quick thinking or rebranding could cover up the fact that she had made a dangerous choice, one that now seemed completely out of touch with the realities of what Americans wanted to see from their leaders. The personal attacks had alienated potential allies, both within the party and beyond. Even some of her supporters began to question the integrity of the campaign. They had seen the truth laid bare in front of them. Levitt's strategy of dividing and attacking had exposed her own vulnerabilities. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett's position could not have been clearer. The victory she had claimed was not just political, it was moral. She had brought the kind of leadership the nation needed, the kind of leadership that prioritized solutions over soundbites, integrity over sensationalism. Her response to the personal attacks had been nothing short of masterful, showing the country what it meant to stand tall in the face of adversity, armed with knowledge, truth, and an unshakable commitment to the issues that truly mattered. Jasmine hadn't just won the debate, she had transformed the conversation. As the days passed, the ripple effect of that confrontation became more pronounced. The political landscape began to shift. The media cycles that had once been dominated by sensational stories about scandal and conflict began to make room for more thoughtful discussions on policy and reform. Jasmine had set the bar. She had made it clear that the days of pandering to the lowest common denominator, of attacking someone's character to score political points, were over. The fallout from Levitt's failure continued to unfold. Within weeks, news broke that her campaign was losing key donors. The messaging that had once won her support was now proving to be a liability. Leavitt's organization, already on shaky ground, was rapidly losing the credibility it had worked so hard to build. This wasn't just about one debate or one strategy. It was about the fundamental collapse of a political tactic that had been used to manipulate and divide. In the end, it wasn't just the fallout from a failed attack. It was the realization that, in the new political climate Jasmine had helped create, truth could no longer be buried beneath the weight of lies. The world was watching, and it was Jasmine Crockett who had made sure the truth was louder than the noise. In the days following the hearing, the political landscape began to shift, and it became clear that Jasmine Crockett had not just won a debate, she had revolutionized how to handle political attacks in an era dominated by divisiveness. What had initially seemed like a tactical confrontation had quickly become a blueprint for navigating the poisonous landscape of modern politics. Her response to Marjorie Taylor Greene's personal attacks was being talked about everywhere, on news stations, in think tanks, and across social media platforms. Jasmine had taken the chaos of smear politics and turned it into a masterclass of strategy. Within hours of the hearing, political analysts began dissecting Jasmine's performance, trying to pinpoint what had made her response so effective. The beauty of her counterattack was not just in the words she used, but in the way she dismantled the attack methodically, leaving nothing to chance. By the next morning, the term Jasmine doctrine had taken root in the political world. It was being used as a point of reference, a new standard for how politicians could rise above personal attacks without compromising their integrity. The Jasmine doctrine became a rallying cry for those tired of the toxic, inflammatory tactics that had taken over American politics. The strategy she had used in that hearing wasn't just about winning the moment, it was about setting a precedent, showing that it was possible to confront and defeat these tactics without descending into the mud. Calm, evidence, strategy, substance. These four pillars would define her approach, and it was becoming clear that they were the antidote to the growing toxicity in politics. First, Jasmine had remained calm. Even in the face of personal insults, even as Marjorie Taylor Greene tried to turn the hearing into a circus of character assassination, Jasmine never lost her composure. Her calmness was not just a trait, it was a weapon in and of itself. She didn't give in to the pressure to shout, to scream, to retaliate in kind. Jasmine knew that the calmest voice in the room would ultimately be the loudest one. She understood that rage might make for good headlines, but calmness, when coupled with truth, was the most powerful tool at her disposal. Her calmness was not passivity, it was the calculated confidence of someone who had been in the fight for years, who knew exactly when to speak and when to let her silence carry the weight of her words. Her presence on that stage, still, unwavering, controlled, was her first strike. It disarmed her opponent before the battle even truly began. Second, Jasmine brought evidence. The documents she pulled out, the facts she cited, were not random or thrown together in haste. They were the result of years of experience, research, and legal expertise. Jasmine didn't just speak to challenge Marjorie Taylor Greene's tactics. She spoke with the authority of someone who had spent countless hours in the trenches, fighting against fraud, injustice, and systemic inequality. She wasn't there to engage in rhetoric. She was there to deliver a case, and she did so with an unshakable confidence that left no room for doubt. The memo she revealed, with its damning directive from Greene's own communications team, was the most powerful of all her pieces of evidence. It wasn't just about the facts she presented. It was about the undeniable proof of a deliberate strategy to destroy her character rather than engage on the issues. That memo wasn't just a piece of paper. It was the moment that shattered Greene's facade. In that instant, Jasmine turned the tables completely. The attack had been about her character. Now the world was focused on the character of the attacker. Third, Jasmine exposed the strategy behind the attack. She didn't simply defend herself against the personal smear campaign. She went deeper. She dissected the tactics being used against her, revealing the underlying motivations. Jasmine showed the world that the political games being played weren't just unproductive. They were dishonest and destructive to the process. In that moment, she didn't just become a defender of her own integrity, She became a defender of the entire political system that was being warped by those who chose dirty tactics over actual debate. "This isn't about me. This is about the kind of politics we're willing to accept," Jasmine said, turning to the camera and speaking directly to the millions of Americans watching at home. She made it clear that the game wasn't just between her and Green. It was between those who believed in substance and those who believed in spectacle. She was calling out a larger failure in the system, a systemic issue that had been allowed to fester for too long. Jasmine didn't just call out her opponent. She exposed the decay at the heart of a broken political system. Finally, Jasmine brought it back to the substance, the issues that mattered. When Marjorie Taylor Greene had tried to pivot back to the personal, to sidestep the policy discussion entirely, Jasmine didn't let her. She refused to let Greene control the narrative. Instead, Jasmine turned the conversation back to the facts, the policies, and the solutions that would actually address the crisis at the border. She didn't let her opponent off the hook. She kept the focus where it belonged, on the issues that were affecting real people, not political careers. The brilliance of Jasmine's approach was that she was never distracted. Even when Levitt tried to escape back into the safe zone of political attacks, Jasmine kept pushing forward, forcing the conversation back to what mattered most. She refused to let this become another empty debate. She refused to let the lies be the narrative. In that moment, Jasmine didn't just defend herself, she hijacked the debate entirely. As political analysts, strategists, and pundits broke down the events of the hearing over the following days, one thing became abundantly clear. Jasmine Crockett had set a new standard for how to confront political attacks. It wasn't enough to simply respond. Jasmine had shown the world how to turn the table, how to shift the focus from personal vendettas to real actionable change. Her calmness, her facts, her ability to expose her opponent's strategy, and her relentless focus on the issues had created a new framework for political discourse. The Jasmine Doctrine became the gold standard. It was what every candidate, every politician should aspire to. Calm under fire, armed with facts, never distracted by the noise, and always bringing the conversation back to the solutions that matter. It wasn't just about defending yourself. It was about defending the principles that the system should be based on. As the weeks passed and pundits continued to analyze the moment, the Jasmine Doctrine became more than just a term. It became a call to action for anyone tired of the games, the slander, and the gridlock. It was a new way of doing politics, a way rooted in truth, transparency, and above all, integrity. Jasmine Crockett had set the bar, and now the world was watching to see if anyone else would dare to follow it. In the days following Jasmine Crockett's confrontation with Marjorie Taylor Greene, the world had shifted. What had begun as a contentious political debate had now become a cultural touchstone, a moment that would be analyzed, dissected, and referenced for years to come. The immediate aftermath was palpable. The air felt charged with the weight of what had just transpired. Jasmine had not just won a debate. She had set a new precedent for political discourse. The world had been watching, and in the wake of that viral confrontation, it was clear that the nation had witnessed something far bigger than a mere hearing on border policy. Polls conducted immediately after the hearing showed a dramatic surge in Jasmine's approval ratings, not just among her base or within her party, but across the political spectrum. Support for Jasmine Crockett spiked in areas where it was least expected, where politicians on the opposite end of the spectrum had long believed that divisive rhetoric and personal attacks were the key to winning. Jasmine had shattered that illusion. She had done what many thought was impossible in the age of extreme political polarization. She had earned the respect of both sides of the aisle. The polls spoke for themselves. Jasmine's approval rating jumped sharply, not just in liberal strongholds, but also in more conservative areas, where many had once dismissed her as just another Democratic voice in the chaos of politics. Her calmness, her methodical approach, and the transparency with which she handled the attacks on her character became a beacon of integrity. People weren't just looking at her policies, they were looking at the woman behind them, and what they saw was a leader who, despite the brutal attacks and the weight of personal slander, had stood her ground with grace, with dignity, and most importantly, with facts. It wasn't about whether people agreed with every single policy she proposed. It was about how she conducted herself in the face of unrelenting personal attacks. It was about the way she handled the lowest forms of political strategy with such dignity and strength that even her fiercest critics had no choice but to acknowledge her character. Jasmine had managed to win over hearts, even those who disagreed with her on most policy issues. Her ability to remain steadfast, her refusal to stoop to the level of those who attacked her, became a symbol of what politics could be, if only the system was willing to make room for leaders who prioritized integrity over spectacle. The national conversation began to shift. Political commentators and analysts, who had spent years feeding into the drama of personal attacks, now found themselves confronted with an uncomfortable truth. The politics of destruction, of turning every policy discussion into a spectacle of personal warfare, was no longer effective. It had been rendered obsolete by someone who refused to engage with the same tactics. In fact, some began to wonder if Jasmine had just set a new bar for how public figures could navigate the treacherous waters of political conflict. Her grace under fire, her ability to stay on message and bring the conversation back to policy, had set an example. It didn't take long for others in the political sphere to take notice. Within weeks of the hearing, an unlikely imitation began to surface. A sitting member of Congress, known for his previous personal attacks on opponents, had been watching the events unfold with increasing admiration. He had been a vocal critic of Jasmine Crockett in the past, often mocking her policies and attacking her record. But after the dust settled from the hearing, something remarkable happened. During a televised session of Congress, this very individual found himself in a position to respond to a heated personal attack from a rival. Instead of escalating the conflict, he paused. The room was tense, the cameras focused on him, waiting for the usual jabs, the personal barbs that had become so common in today's political climate. But instead he looked at the camera, then toward his opponent, and with a calm that mirrored Jasmine's in the hearing, he said, "Can we go back to policy now?" The room was stunned. It wasn't the usual theatrical response. It wasn't the shout of a politician looking for sound bites or trying to own the moment. It was the beginning of a shift, one that was directly inspired by Jasmine's example. In a single measured sentence, this congressman had subtly but powerfully rejected the notion that personal attacks were the only path to success in politics. And the implications were clear. Jasmine Crockett had not only defeated her opponent in that hearing, she had effectively redefined the expectations for how public figures should conduct themselves in political discourse. The response from the public was overwhelmingly positive. Citizens across the political spectrum expressed their approval, not just for the content of the debate, but for how Jasmine had conducted herself. People who had been exhausted by the constant barrage of personal insults, the back and forth of pettiness that seemed to define politics at every level, finally had something different to latch onto. It wasn't just about a politician they agreed with. It was about someone they respected, someone who had chosen a path of decency and integrity, even when the odds were stacked against her. Even the media, for once, was forced to confront the power of substance over spectacle. Talk shows, which had long capitalized on political drama, began to change their tone. Pundits who had spent years fanning the flames of division now found themselves reconsidering the kind of conversations they were having. It wasn't just that Jasmine had won the hearing, she had won something far more important: the public's trust. And in the era of 24-hour news cycles, when public opinion can shift in an instant, trust was the most powerful currency anyone could have. Jasmine Crockett had not just responded to an attack, she had become a symbol of the kind of leadership America had been waiting for. Her response to Levitt's dirty tactics had created a ripple effect that reached beyond her own political career. It became a template for those tired of the political circus, a blueprint for how to navigate the complexities of leadership with honesty and honor. It was clear now, her victory was about more than just personal vindication. It was about setting a new standard, a standard that said, if you want to win, you don't need to tear others down. You just need to stand tall with the truth. And as the nation began to reflect on what Jasmine had done, the message was unmistakable. Truth, integrity, and a return to policy-based debate were the new way forward. It wasn't just a lesson for politicians. It was a lesson for all of us. A reminder that we get the leadership we demand. And if the political world could adapt to this new model, maybe, just maybe, real change was finally within reach. The fallout from Jasmine Crockett's confrontation with Marjorie Taylor Greene didn't just echo through the political landscape. It sent shockwaves that reverberated across the entire country. Once dismissed as a loudmouth lawyer in the eyes of her critics, Jasmine was now redefined as something far greater, the gold standard for political rebuttals that never compromised dignity. Her calculated, unflinching response to personal attacks had turned her into a symbol of how political discourse could be elevated from the gutter of insults and sound bites to a level of graceful, yet unyielding integrity. Political analysts, pundits, and public figures alike marveled at how Jasmine had turned a hostile environment into a masterclass of composure and conviction. The narrative of her victory, not through shouting or name-calling, but through calm, evidence-backed, and morally sound counterattack, quickly became the subject of widespread admiration. A political science professor wrote, "Jasmine has proven that you can make your opponent bow without needing to raise your voice or insult their character." This wasn't just political commentary, it was a revelation, a blueprint for how to navigate the savage, polarized world of American politics with strength, but without breaking one's moral compass. Soon, Jasmine's response became a case study at law schools, journalism schools, and political science programs. Professors and students alike pored over the strategic elegance with which she'd handled a public attack. Her name became synonymous with the future of political communication, a moment that signaled a potential turning point in American politics. She had defied the conventional wisdom, showing that it was possible to stand firm against political sabotage while still maintaining a sense of respect, integrity, and purpose. The narrative of Jasmine Crockett's triumph had transcended the hearing room. It was now a blueprint for the future of communication in the age of polarization. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.